40 years in the garden teaches you a lot. Most lessons are small, some are expensive, and a few stay with you for decades. I've planted hundreds of perennials over the years. Some became favorites, some quietly disappeared. But these 9? These are the plants I wish I had researched more carefully before bringing them home. The photos looked incredible. The descriptions sounded perfect. Gardening magazines praised them. Friends recommended them. And every one of them seemed like a smart purchase at the time. They weren't. Not because they were unattractive. In fact, some of the most beautiful plants I've ever grown are on this list. The problem was that nobody explained the fine print, the details that only become obvious after you've lived with them for a few seasons. Today, I'm sharing those mistakes so you don't have to make them yourself. And the first plant might surprise you. It's elegant, dramatic, beloved by cottage garden enthusiasts, and still one of the most misunderstood plants sold in garden centers. Number 9. Foxglove, Digitalis purpurea. Few flowers create a bigger impact in the garden than foxglove. Towering spikes covered in bell-shaped blooms rise above the border in shades of pink, purple, cream, and white. Pollinators adore them, and they bring a timeless, storybook quality to any landscape. Garden centers often market foxglove as a perennial, and that's where many gardeners get caught off guard. Technically, the label isn't completely wrong, but it isn't telling the whole story either. For most gardeners, common foxglove behaves as a biennial. In its first year, the plant produces only a low rosette of leaves. No flowers, no dramatic display, just foliage quietly establishing itself. In the second year, it finally delivers the breathtaking flower spikes that made you buy it in the first place. Then, after flowering, the original plant dies. That's not a disease. It's not poor care. It's simply the natural life cycle of the plant. If you want foxgloves to remain in your garden year after year, you must allow them to self-seed and establish a new generation. Foxglove remains one of the most beautiful plants you can grow. Just make sure you're buying it for what it actually is, not for what the label makes you think it will be. Number 8. Coral bells, Heuchera hybrids. This one hurts because I genuinely love the way these plants look. Walk through any garden center and you'll see them lined up in every color imaginable. Deep burgundy, bright lime, copper orange, silver purple, peach, caramel, almost every shade a plant breeder can create. The foliage is stunning, and that's exactly why gardeners keep buying them. I did too. More than once. The problem isn't how they look when you bring them home. The problem is what happens a few years later. Most of the heavily bred hybrid coral bells gradually lift themselves out of the ground. It happens so slowly that many gardeners don't even notice it at first. Each season, the crown rises slightly higher above the soil line, then a little higher the next year. By the 3rd or 4th season, much of the root crown can be exposed to the elements. Winter freeze-thaw cycles begin damaging the roots. Frost heaving pushes the plant even farther upward, and eventually the plant declines or disappears entirely. Many gardeners blame themselves. They assume they watered incorrectly, fertilized too much, or planted in the wrong location. Often, none of those things are the real issue. The truth is that many modern Heuchera hybrids simply don't have the longevity of their wild ancestors. The flashy foliage may sell the plant, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee durability. Number 7. Russian Sage, Perovskia atriplexifolia. Few perennials create as much impact with as little effort as Russian sage. Its silvery stems and clouds of lavender-blue flowers seem to float above the garden for months. It's drought-tolerant, pollinator-friendly, and practically glows in late summer sunlight. For years, it was one of the most recommended landscape plants in North America. And honestly, it deserves much of that praise. But some of the older varieties come with a frustrating flaw that doesn't show up until they've been in the ground for several seasons. The first year looks fantastic. The second year looks even better. Then, somewhere around the third or fourth season, the center begins to decline. The plant slowly opens up from the middle. Growth remains strong around the outer edges, while the center becomes sparse or completely bare. Instead of a dense, attractive mound, you end up with a ring of stems surrounding an empty space. From a distance, it can resemble a large lavender-colored donut. Many gardeners assume poor pruning caused the problem, but in reality, this is a common aging habit of some older Russian sage selections. Fortunately, breeders recognized the issue years ago. Modern varieties such as compact, improved selections were specifically developed to maintain a tighter shape, stronger stems, and a fuller center. They stay upright longer, resist splitting, and continue looking attractive well beyond the point where older forms begin to decline. Number 6. Hollyhocks, Alcea rosea. Few plants capture the charm of an old-fashioned cottage garden quite like hollyhocks. Their towering flower spikes can reach 6 to 8 feet tall, creating the kind of nostalgic backdrop that appears in gardening books, paintings, and family memories. Many gardeners plant them expecting a permanent feature in the landscape. That's often where the disappointment begins. Much like foxglove, hollyhocks are frequently marketed as perennials, but in many climates they behave more like biennials or short-lived perennials. The pattern is familiar. During the first season, you get a rosette of leaves. The second season brings the spectacular flower display you've been waiting for. After that, the original plant often declines or disappears entirely. If that were the only issue, hollyhocks might still be worth the trouble. Unfortunately, they come with another challenge that experienced gardeners know all too well. Rust. Hollyhock rust is a fungal disease that thrives in warm, humid conditions. It usually begins as small orange or rust-colored spots on the undersides of leaves. As the season progresses, the infection spreads upward through the plant. By midsummer, lower leaves may be yellowing and dropping. By late summer, what started as a beautiful flowering spire can look tired, sparse, and heavily damaged. The flowers may continue blooming, but the foliage often tells a completely different story. Number 5. Bee balm, monarda. Bee balm is one of those plants that seems impossible to resist. The vibrant flowers attract hummingbirds, butterflies, and bees in incredible numbers. A mature clump in full bloom can become one of the busiest spots in the entire garden, and yet not all bee balms are created equal. The older varieties, especially many of the classic red cultivars, have a long history of struggling with powdery mildew. The first half of summer looks fantastic, then the weather turns warm and humid. A faint white coating appears on the leaves. Within weeks, that coating spreads across much of the plant, giving the foliage a dusty, gray-white appearance that can make an otherwise healthy planting look neglected. By late summer, some older cultivars have lost much of their ornamental value, even though they're technically still alive and flowering. The frustrating part is that this problem has largely been solved. Modern breeding programs have introduced cultivars with dramatically improved resistance to powdery mildew. Many of these newer selections maintain attractive foliage throughout the season while delivering the same brilliant flowers and pollinator appeal. That's why variety names matter. A plant tag that simply says bee balm tells you very little. A tag with a specific cultivar name gives you the opportunity to research disease resistance, mature size, and long-term performance before purchasing. That small detail can make the difference between a plant you'll enjoy for years and one you'll regret by August. There's an important lesson hidden in every plant we've discussed so far. The plants that dominate catalog covers and display tables aren't always the plants that perform best over time. Number 4. Obedient plant, Physostegia virginiana. This plant wins an award for having one of the most misleading names in gardening. At first glance, obedient plant seems like the perfect perennial. Tall spikes of soft pink, lavender, or white flowers rise above the border, attracting bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds throughout the summer. As a North American native, it's often promoted as an easy, pollinator-friendly addition to cottage gardens. The name sounds reassuring too. But don't be fooled. The plant isn't called obedient because it stays where you plant it. The name comes from a curious trait of the flowers themselves. If you gently move an individual flower on the stem, it stays in the position where you placed it, almost like a tiny hinge. That's the obedient part. Everything happening underground tells a very different story. Beneath the soil, obedient plant spreads through an extensive network of rhizomes that slowly but relentlessly expand outward. What begins as a tidy clump can become a substantial colony within just a few years. At first, you notice a few extra shoots nearby, then more appear. Before long, it's emerging among neighboring perennials, weaving through established beds and occupying space you never intended to give it. In fertile, moist soil, the spread can be surprisingly aggressive. Many gardeners discover that controlling the plant requires regular thinning, division, or physical barriers to keep it contained. Number 3. Fancy coneflower hybrids, Echinacea. This one surprised me more than almost any other plant on the list. Walk into a garden center today, and you'll find coneflowers in every color imaginable. Bright orange, fiery red, coral pink, lemon yellow, mango, peach, and combinations that barely resemble the original species. The flowers are stunning. The catalog photos are irresistible. And that's exactly why so many gardeners fill their carts with them. I did too. The problem is that many of these highly bred hybrids were selected primarily for unusual flower color and appearance, not necessarily for longevity. The original purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, built its reputation by being tough, durable, and remarkably long-lived. Some modern hybrids haven't inherited all of those strengths. Many gardeners notice the same pattern. The first season is spectacular. The second season is decent. By the third season, the plant has weakened significantly or disappeared altogether. What makes this particularly frustrating is that the colorful hybrids are often considerably more expensive than the original species. In other words, gardeners frequently pay more for plants that live shorter lives. Meanwhile, the humble species form keeps returning year after year without attracting much attention at the nursery. The lesson here isn't that all hybrid coneflowers are bad. Many are beautiful. Some are excellent performers. The lesson is that beauty and longevity are not always the same thing. Number 2. Plume Poppy, Macleaia cordata. If you're drawn to bold, dramatic plants, plume poppy is almost impossible to ignore. The enormous blue-green foliage, towering stems, and airy white flower plumes create an architectural presence that can dominate an entire border. On paper, it sounds like the perfect statement perennial. That's exactly why so many gardeners fall for it. The nursery tag usually describes it as a bold accent plant. Landscape designers praise its size and texture. Catalog photos make it look like the answer to every empty corner in the garden. What those descriptions rarely mention is what happens underground. For the first couple of years, everything appears normal. The plant grows larger, fills out, and delivers the dramatic look you paid for. Then shoots begin appearing where they shouldn't. A few feet away at first, then farther and farther. Before long, the plant is emerging in nearby beds, lawns, pathways, and places that seem completely disconnected from the original planting. The problem is its extensive rhizome system. Underground stems travel surprisingly long distances, sending up new shoots far beyond the visible clump. Removing the top growth accomplishes very little because the real plant remains hidden beneath the soil. Once established, plume poppy often becomes less of a perennial and more of a permanent negotiation. Number 1. Lily of the Valley, Convallaria mahalis. This was the hardest plant to put at the top of the list, not because it's controversial, because it's beautiful. Almost everyone has a memory attached to Lily of the Valley. Maybe it grew in a grandparent's garden. Maybe you remember the fragrance drifting through the yard in spring. Maybe you've admired those tiny white bells since childhood. It's one of the most beloved perennials in gardening, and it's also the plant I regret planting more than any other. The flowers are perfect. Small clusters of delicate white bells appear in early spring, filling shaded areas with one of the most unforgettable fragrances any garden plant can produce. For a few years, it seems like a dream. Then the spreading begins. What starts as a modest patch slowly becomes a colony. The plant expands through underground rhizomes that move quietly beneath the soil. New shoots appear farther and farther from the original planting. Borders disappear. Bed edges become meaningless. Many gardeners discover the spread only after the plant has already established itself throughout a large section of the landscape. And unlike some spreading plants, lily of the valley is extremely difficult to eliminate completely. Small root fragments left behind can regenerate, meaning removal often turns into a long-term project rather than a weekend task. But the aggressive growth isn't what ultimately pushed this plant to the top of my list. The real concern is safety. Every part of lily of the valley contains toxic compounds. Leaves, flowers, stems, berries, and roots all contain substances that can be dangerous if ingested. For households with small children or curious pets, that's something worth taking seriously. Many gardeners know the fragrance. Far fewer know the risk. That's what makes this plant different from the others on the list. Some plants become maintenance problems. Some become expensive mistakes. Lily of the valley can become both. And because it carries such positive memories for so many people, gardeners often overlook the warnings entirely. Before you buy a perennial, ask 3 questions. How long does it actually live? How does it spread? What does it look like after 5 years, not 5 weeks? Those answers matter far more than the picture on the label. And sometimes, the plain, unexciting species plant in the back corner of the nursery turns out to be the best investment in the entire garden. The flashy newcomer may win your attention. The reliable performer earns its place for decades. That's a lesson I wish I had learned much earlier